This is the 10th lesson in our series in the book of James, the wise Christian in a world gone mad. James wrote this letter for Jewish believers in AD 48. Many of these Christians fled Jerusalem to avoid persecution after Stephen's death. God wants believers to practice wisdom in a world that doesn't always appreciate Christians. I'm entitling this next lesson, That's Not Fair. Last time, we were in James chapter 4, verses 7 through 17. James told us what it takes to choose God's ways over the world's ways. We must humble ourselves. This is not some religious show. This is a sincere understanding of who we really are and our need for God's mercy and help. We are to live a humble lifestyle, which is true godly wisdom. But let's be honest. This isn't easy when the world doesn't treat us fairly. It's easier to fight the world with worldly tactics or join the world. It's hard to trust God and continue to do good. We want to strike back. We want justice. Even in envy, we may want to get the upper hand too, just like the world. And in our frustration, we may end up fighting one another, judging one another, or looking down on one another. But God says, no, trust me. A long time ago, before I became a Christian, I did an internship with an experienced graphic designer and illustrator. This designer had an assistant named Sam whom he treated disrespectfully because he was a Christian, especially when he tried to share his faith. This designer used to tell me to stay away from Sam because he might talk to me about Jesus. But I didn't really mind. I was open to religious talk, it didn't bother me. Now, Sam wasn't a religious nut. He was cogent and gave good reasons for his faith. When we got alone together, when the designer wasn't around, he used to ask me to consider Jesus for myself. He gave me a New Testament to read the book of John, and I actually did it. And I had the opportunity to see Jesus differently for the first time. Sam made a powerful impression on me. I've never met a Christian quite like him. He was kind, even in the midst of ridicule. And he shared his faith in a realistic and with a humble attitude. He wasn't antagonistic. He showed a lot of respect and understanding to the designer, despite the guy's attitude. I knew this man Sam had a deep belief. He was not just religious. There was something more. I never really wanted to be a Christian at that time because I felt that I had this picture of Christians as angry and never having any fun or just sour about everything. Hated people who weren't them. And for the first time, I met somebody who I actually admired, and I remember telling myself, if I ever became a Christian, I want to be like that. Let's read James chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Your wealth is rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent men who are not opposing you. Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no, or you will be condemned. What do we do when the powerful, the rich, and the influential get the upper hand? Well, we can get angry and demand our way, or we can wait on God. The rich who oppress us, who are poor and vulnerable in comparison, will be dealt with by God who sees everything, as it says in chapter 5, verse 1 through 6. Those who put their hope in wealth and positions of power and hoard wealth in these last days will be disappointed because none of that will last very long. It will all prove to be of no value in the end. So, brothers and sisters, don't envy them. James announces judgment upon those who live like this in verses 4 through 6. They may take advantage of the vulnerable now, but God sees everything and will judge everything. Verse 4, look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent men who are not opposing you. So, what's the solution for us? What are we supposed to do? Well, we as Christians are to be like the farmer who waits for the appropriate seasons to yield his crops. See verse 7. Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. The farmer waits for the right season, for nurturing and for growth. Likewise, we wait on the Lord's coming. When we suffer, we are in a season of nurturing. We are in the process of developing patience and perseverance and true wisdom, which is born out of a genuine faith, as we saw in chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Okay, eventually, there will be a season of harvest when the Lord comes. So be patient. Act patient. And practice genuine faith in God. Don't let pressure cause us to lose control over ourselves and we start grumbling against one another. Verse 9. Don't grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Don't let internal desires and a double-minded perspective dominate our thinking. Remember, the Lord is in our midst, and He judges impartially. And a consequence is that we ourselves will be judged by God if we keep it up. Rather, be like the prophets of old, according to verse 10 through 11. Remember how the prophets spoke the word of the Lord faithfully? They didn't augment the message to fit their personal agendas or desires. They endured hardship. They answered men the way God wanted them to, even under unfair conditions. They didn't retaliate in kind. They persevered. And be like Job. Job is a good example of patience, like the other prophets. Talk about life being unfair. Job really had it bad. Yet, he didn't curse God. He didn't follow his own way. He waited on God for answers, even despite his friends' accusations. He endured being looked down upon. See what God finally brought about as a reward? God came to his rescue eventually, and Job was more blessed afterward than before. If we persevere, we will also see reward that is greater than anything in this life. We must persevere. Another temptation is to act like everybody else. Verse 12, above all, my brothers, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no, or you will be condemned. In this life, people will say anything to get their way. But we don't have to be like that, even when we're under duress. Just say what we mean, and mean what we say. Anything beyond this is worthy of condemnation. If I were to summarize this whole section that we just read, it would be, don't envy the wicked or retaliate against them. Don't worry. God sees it all. Rather let God deal with them and let Him help you. Just remain faithful by being patient. So what does patience look like? Especially when life isn't treating us fairly. James says godly wisdom is humble, peace-loving, and considerate, submissive, full of mercy, impartial, and sincere. Think about a Christian who acts like this, and when they are unfairly treated. This is what James is talking about. That person is practicing their faith. It's not just talk. It's not boasting. It's not angry outbursts or pushing to get one's own way. It's a humble spirit who actively puts their trust in God. Unfortunately, most people don't act like this when they're under pressure, even Christians. Most people don't listen well. Most people are quick to anger and are full of envy. They may couch their behavior in religious language or may position their behavior as godly behavior, but this is not from God. I can be like that myself. It's better to be honest than to fake bravado. God can see through it. It's better to be saddened by our own weaknesses and sins and to seek God's help than to pretend we are strong and righteous and act foolishly. We need to learn to wait on God. We need to learn to honestly ask God for wisdom. We need to learn to treat one another with mercy and peace, even when we're struggling and under pressure. The answer, whether to unfair treatment or even dealing with our brothers and sisters, is patience.